Here's what's coming up on episode 125 of the Big Seance podcast. Slade Roberson.
As the cliche goes, the voices in my head started to tell me about this blog that I was going to start called Shift Your Spirits. And I did. And little did I know, there were a bunch of people who wanted to read that stuff, and they found me.
You have a podcast title called How to F Up Your Ability to Manifest Joy and Abundance. You are a genius, Slade.
But also, I want to celebrate the fact that you're a little bit busted, and so am I, and I'm not trying to be anything except what I can be. And of course, we want to be better than we are. And so do those titles reflect that? Because to me, that's where I'm coming from when I'm making those jokes.
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
When I first started blogging, I connected with our friend and past guest, Ash Riley. She was so very helpful early on in my Big Seance journey. She recommended I check out a blog called Shift Your Spirits by someone named Slade Roberson. This was around 2012, as far as I can remember. But Slade launched Shift Your Spirits all the way back in 2006, actually. Ash was like, oh my gosh, this guy inspires me so much. He is amazing. Check him out. And honestly, my first thought was, that is a cool name. Well, I did check out Shift Your Spirits, and I've followed him ever since. Something else I think about when I think about Slade are the amazing titles of his blogs, and of course now his podcast episodes, and I'll want to find out where those come from a little bit later. But Slade is a professional intuitive counselor. He's also the author of several books, such as the fiction title Cloud Busting, but that's under Eric Slade, if you're looking for that one. He's the creator of courses like Automatic Intuition and Contacting Your Spirit Guides 101. In March of 2017, Slade launched the Shift Your Spirits podcast because, of course, that's what we do. He's always had this amazing tagline, and it'll probably tell you a lot about him. Maybe not, I don't know. We'll find out a little later. 83% fewer hearts and flowers than most New Age blather. And if you listen to his podcast, you've heard him say that. Slade can be found at sladeroberson.com, and that's Slade, like it sounds. And then Roberson is ROBERSON.com. And that link and probably lots of other links will be in the show notes. Slade Roberson, welcome to the Parlor.
Thank you for having me.
What can I offer you to drink today?
I'm having a little bit of green tea.
Nice. I'm chilling with some water today because it's summer and I just woke up. Although the listeners don't know what time it is. It's around lunchtime. And I just woke up. So, Slade, talk to me about 83% fewer hearts and flowers than most New Age blather. And, you know, what's that all about? Where'd it come from?
Okay, so it comes from the old days of when you would set up a WordPress blog and it would ask you for the title and it would ask you for a subtitle, right? And, you know, of course, the subtitle is supposed to be something informative and filled with keywords and, you know, very useful, like
SEO.
Yeah, very SEO friendly. And I really struggled. I didn't struggle with the title. I always had the title Shift Your Spirits. That sort of came to me, and I knew I wanted to call it that. But I didn't really know if I should go more serious with, like, a blog for people who, like, I just didn't know the angle I wanted to take. And I wanted to kind of express some irreverence in a way. Like, I wanted people to know this is not your average, unicorns and lavender heart, angel wing kind of situation. I wanted you to land on this site after surfing all that and be like, oh, wait a minute.
This is it.
This tone is totally different, And so there was, I couldn't decide on something, and I ran across this plugin. And this was really in the early days of WordPress, and I could, write a little bit of PHP and tinker with plugins. And I found this plugin that would rotate a quote on your homepage. Like, whenever you refresh the homepage, it would show a different inspirational quotes. And so all you had to do was go through and just put in those little lines of text, whatever text you wanted to, right? And I was like, oh, I can edit this. I wonder what would happen if I put it in my subtitle and let it rotate out my subtitle, and then I don't have to pick one. I'll just put like 100 of them in there. And so I got a little loopy and snarky with I would write some serious ones, and then I would slip in these things that were a little wonky. And that one kept coming up over and over again. And I started to get emails from people who said, oh my God, I love your tagline. And I was like, which tagline did you love? And they would say 83% fewer hearts and flowers. And I was like, I like that one too. And so eventually that plugin developer stopped, updating the code, and I kept it around for as long as I could. But I finally decided, you know what? It served its purpose. I have arrived at the perfect tagline. And so I just made that my permanent tagline. But the reason why it's 83% is because in numerology, that would reduce to an 11. And I felt like, because I was looking for a number that kind of sounded like a lot, like 75%, but something that sounded like I had actually done some kind of statistical analysis and come up with a really, really specific number. And I thought, 83, that reduces to an 11, and 11 is sort of a gateway or a portal, right? So, yeah, that's how I came up with it.
I absolutely love it. And like I said, or like you said, you kind of feel that way. When I found your blog, I was in the middle of what I call my spiritual shift. And I was craving a lot of these things. And you've blogged about spiritual burnout. And I do kind of think, not that I've tried everything in the world at all, or that I'm this, majorly spiritual person, but I was consuming a lot in those days. And when all of a sudden you see that, I think it's like, this guy's going to be just straight up real. He's not a guru sitting on top of a mountain. He may be on a yoga mat, but he's going to be cool at the same time.
That's all the kinds of things that I would want you to think, for sure. I also, my whole design sensibility is, if you can't do anything fancy and beautiful, like Ash's sites, for instance, are always like really lovely and complex graphically. My goal was kind of be like, that artist portfolio, that just matte black sort of, there's nothing here but the content just in the center of the page. And so that's always my default with styling something, is to make it really minimal, because if you make it minimal and then you just have something very simple and you stick with it, it has the feeling of intention. It has this sort of strict, almost seriousness about it. And to me, the idea of you surfing the web and seeing all these crazy, like, lotus position, alien illustrations, and like those sites that have like the harp music playing and, all that kind of stuff. And then you land on me Because I call those magic carpet rides, when you're like going down the rabbit holes of the internet and you're like uncovering all this like insane synchronicity and you're just riding and it's, the sky is turning gray outside and you've been up all night and you're like, wow, my mind is blown. So when you're on one of those magic carpet rides, my idea was that you would hit my site and it would break you. It would just be like, bam, just ground you in this lack of fluff.
Well, don't act like there's no visual part of this either, because I can tell you one of the things that stands out to me is, at least when I was finding you, you have some intense visuals that you always have with your blogs as well. And so that stands out to me. And it's not like anything else out there.
Well, curating the imagery is kind of like frosting the cupcakes for me, because I actually end up using a lot of the same 2 or 3 photographers. They're all Creative Commons photographers. And one of the things that, again, that idea of the rule and of grounding everything in both simplicity, but also reality, was I didn't want to do anything illustrative. I wanted all the imagery on the site to be photorealistic, even if it's suggestive of spiritual things. So, for instance, I use a lot of silhouettes and creepy shadows to communicate things like guides and ghosts and stuff like that. I use a lot of just real literal imagery, sometimes kind of dirty imagery. Like, for instance, the homepage image right now is of a feather found on the ground. And it's on asphalt and it's got dust on it. And there's something about that that's so much more expressing what I'm trying to express than this beautiful photoshopped feather floating in a sea of, fractal imagery or whatever. What I'm trying to communicate here is, the intersection of supernatural and everyday.
And they make you think too. I start thinking, okay, how's this image connect with what he has to say? How's this visual trick that he's put in this photo that is clearly not something I'd see with my naked eye? How is that connecting, with what he's trying to say? You do an excellent job at that. And I know it's probably impossible and almost cruel, but tell us how you got here, because you went through a period of some stuff. You've gone through some stuff before getting to where you are now, and you are a huge success at what you do now. And I think you've found your home, your journey. But take us back.
I guess the turning point story, I call it my origin story, because so many people who do this kind of work have a kind of a dark night of the soul story, or they have some kind of born again situation happen to them. And it usually is something traumatic. You know what I mean? Like we usually do have to be sort of stripped away and beat down and knocked about a little bit in order to kind of get here. And I guess we all have some version of that. I used to call it the switch. Some people call it a turning point or dark night of the soul. I like the word switch because it really was a moment in time. I had an aneurysm or a stroke at the age of 33, and it was a climactic exclamation point on a really, really stressful period of being in a job that I thought on paper was like my dream job, and it turned out to be like a nightmare. It was the worst working environment I'd ever been in. I was actually a student advisor at a university, and I worked in a career counseling center. So you can see the connection already to kind of what I do now. But it was this really great counseling position that didn't require me to have a master's degree yet. So it was this transitional situation while I tried to figure out what kind of counseling I wanted to do and go back to school. And but I was still getting to work in an environment with counselors and psychotherapists. And so I thought, this is amazing. These are my people. And, it was a situation where the boss was an extremely cruel bully. And my life was a complete nightmare, like day after day after day. And so this thing that looked like, yes, this is it, ended up not being it at all. And I don't know how long I would have stayed in it, but to try to shorten the story a little bit, I had a stroke one night on a Sunday evening. I was at a club and I heard this pop in my jaw, that kind of like when your ears pop in an airplane, or if you have TMJ and you have a little bit of a pop. I heard this pop, and then I was having trouble with one of my contact lenses to the point where I was like, oh, screw this. I'm just going to go home and, take my eyes out and go to bed. And I woke up the next morning and my face was paralyzed, and part of my side and arm and hand and, mostly my upper body and one side of my body. So my face was completely melted. Needless to say, it ended up really pulling the rug out from under me in so many different ways. I lost the job because I wouldn't go to work in that state. They pretty much forced me to resign. And I hate to admit it because it sounds like, oh, this is supposed to be this big spiritual awakening. But in the moment, the thing that hit me the hardest was the vanity of the situation. I had to wear an eye patch. My face was entirely melted, and I sounded like I was drunk when I spoke. And as someone who now podcasts on a weekly basis, my ability to speak and to, say what I think and feel is, one of my superpowers. And so to have that impacted to the point where I did not want to talk to anyone was a really big deal. And I pretty much became agoraphobic. I became something of a shut-in for about a 2-year period while I recuperated. And in that place of what do you do when your face is melted, you feel completely like you just want to crawl in a hole somewhere. And the thought of going out and interviewing for jobs was just like, that's never going to happen. There's no way I could go and present myself. And so I just retreated. And one of the things that I kind of latched onto was the internet and looking for some way to work from home. This was 2003 when this was happening. So blogs were like a new thing. And so I started teaching myself to code. And I was like, there's really nothing left for me to do except the thing that I always wanted to do and have been running from, which is just to write and publish and put myself out there. And so I started blogging about my journey to kind of reconnect with my spirituality, because one of the things that I felt led me to this sort of dark place in my life was I had lost a lot of that sort of magical worldview that I had had in my teens and 20s. I had sort of strayed away from a lot of the spirituality that I used to be excited and hungry about. And so I went through this period of like, well, what do I do? What most people do is they reach for their faith, like whatever that might be. And for me, that was the goddess. It was mostly kind of more of a Wiccan sort of tradition. So I started working a lot of magic in my house and spells and trying to fill my environment with feminine energy, because that was something that was really missing at that time. And I started to try to contact whatever guides and guardians I had access to. And they started to speak to me and tell me what to do. As the cliche goes, the voices in my head started to tell me about this blog that I was going to start called Shift Your Spirits. And I did. And little did I know, there were a bunch of people who wanted to read that stuff, and they found me. And here I am.
I have a tough question. Was the aneurysm written in the stars for you? Was that something that was in the plan to kind of make that shift happen?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I could make an argument for any number of explanations for that. Like, I am not likely to enable someone to think in terms of fate. You know what I mean? Like, that's not something that I'm really comfortable with. I can see how there were a lot of choices that I made that kind of led me to that point. I could also make an argument that it was a kind of divine intervention in some way. Like, it was, but I don't get the feeling that, like some people like me will speak about pre-life plans in which, their life is sort of planned out. Like, I'm going to go through these things and it's all for this learning experience. I really don't think that it's that clever, especially for me. I think I created a sort of emergency situation. And I think that it was like my guides had to get me out. And in the movie, you might have this great heist scenario planned out, but then it all goes to hell. And at the last minute, you just have to lob a grenade and distract people and grab the guy and get him out of there. You know what I'm saying? And so I kind of feel like it was just a big, disaster, but it doesn't feel planned to me and intentional in that kind of way. I think the part that's intentional is the work that I'm doing, which was something that I steadily progressed towards for much of my life and then went away from. And then this event kind of brought me back to it. But I could see where, had I waited, something else might have happened, to bring me back to it. I think that what I see a lot with people that I work with and speak with is that the doorways and the opportunities that present themselves to you escalate like the levels in a video game. Each time you flip the board and go to the next level. And in this analogy, I'm thinking, you say no to that. Like, no, I'm not going to tell the world that I hear voices right now. I have a good job at a university, and you put that away and you move on. The next time that presents to you, it's going to be elevated. The situation is going to be more intense in some way. The monsters are going to move faster on this level. And I think that keeps happening. It keeps ratcheting up. Until you reach a point where you engage with it, either out of fear of, next time I don't want to wait and see what disaster they have cooked up for me to stop me in my tracks on the next go around. So at whatever point you choose to kind of open that doorway, I think for most people, it does need to be something where you're a little bit forced into it.
If I go back and look at your old content, I was trying to figure out what the first blog was that I saw. And I don't know if I found it, but one of the earliest that I remember really loving and connecting to is one that was called Hummingbird Screen. Do you remember Hummingbird Screen?
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of those little contemplative, personal essays about, and less of a tutorial like how to ground yourself, and more of a, this thing happened to me today. I saw this thing happen and I reflected on it in a sort of profound way and ended up sharing it as a piece of writing. That actually kind of represents my favorite kind of writing on the blog.
And looking back now, I mean, you've got enough years behind it where, like, even with my blog, the old blog content before the podcast, I sometimes forget about some of them, and I'm like, oh man, is that my writing? What was that me? What was I doing that day? Do you go back and, because at this point it's 12 years ago, some of the first ones.
Yeah, I think they're into the thousands of blog posts. I've never really counted them because my current blogging platform doesn't really total those up in a really easy way to see. And then I have like hundreds of drafts mixed in there with, that aren't published. So it kind of throws the number a little bit. But, you have to think I was at least blogging once a week for pretty much 12 years. There were periods where I would rerun content, meaning, I'd kind of go back in and mine the archives a little bit. And actually in a recent podcast episode, I went all the way back to a post that was probably one of my first dozen posts. And because those early posts were so long, we used to, in the early days of blogging, we would write these, 15,000 word, blog posts or these series, that you could read for hours if you wanted to. And so that long format evolved away as I followed people's attention spans and got a little bit more focused on what I was doing. So I do like to look back at these different sort of waves of, like, ooh, that was the long rambling time period of the blog, or it's weird when I look at the older stuff, Patrick, honestly, it's much more mystical and it has a religiosity to it that kind of creeps me out a little bit. Like if I rewrote that, or if I were to reshare some of that information, I would probably back off some of that in some way. And here's why. Because it represents for me, like you were saying, you discovered it when you were going through a sort of spiritual awakening time period. And that's a really specific frame of mind. It's a really heightened state to be in. And so I would never change those posts or remove them because they represent that for other people. And so I always think the me that I am now those don't appeal to me in the same way as, who I was when I wrote them. But there's someone who is in that state who's discovering it for the first time, and I did that episode because someone emailed me and said, I just discovered your blog last Thursday. And I was like, really? Okay, that's amazing. And I've never heard of you before, but I love this post you wrote about the voices and who it is that you're talking to when you talk to yourself. And I was like, oh, that was an amazing post. And I remember thinking, this is a manifesto, man. This is me really like going in hard on what I think about the way clairaudience works. And I thought, this is what my blog's going to be about, which I would think at least once a month, and then I would, get onto some other kind of topic and think, no, I kind of want to write about this. But at the time, there were these really intensely detailed kind of expository pieces about spirit communication, connecting with your guides and being, getting really into the weeds with it, I guess, a little bit. And over time, I had discovered these, what I call paranormal memoirs, which is where I tell narrative nonfiction stories about freaky supernatural stuff that happened to me. A woman who interviewed me on her TV show recently said it was like New Age David Sedaris, which I died. And that's like one of the greatest compliments I've ever had. And I never thought about that, but I humbly accept that wonderful, accolade. It's like, really? Oh man, that's a huge compliment. But what I think she was trying to communicate was the kind of sense of humor and nerdiness that was so, recorded within these experiences where I was talking about something very outlandish, but also deep, but always tweaked in such a way that, I don't know, maybe it's a deflection to throw that humor in to kind of make it a little less heavy or weird. But it was a sweet spot for me because those paranormal memoirs represent a type of writing that is an intersection of fiction and the spirituality stuff and kind of personal diaries. And, me, if you had a beer with me and I got really going, and was telling stories or whatever, like that drunk uncle at Thanksgiving kind of thing. Cool
drunk uncle.
I like it that you like that story about the hummingbird because those are some of my favorite pieces of writing, and they're not necessarily the audience's favorite. So I always feel like the people who get those, I secretly feel a little bit affirmed that someone appreciates those, because I want them to be more liked than they are. And then there's content that I learned to write for the audience. Once you have an audience, then you sort of work for them, and they tell you what they want, and they write you and ask questions. And at some point, the blog just became answering questions, in essay form.
You seem to be really, really genius at how you title your blog posts. And I want to just name some of the ones that stand out to me. And, you can jump in with commentary if you need to, but
okay.
This jumps out at me. I mean, you have 15 ways to stop feeling like a failure. Who doesn't know of ways that could help them? Recover from spiritual burnout. About those repeating numbers you keep seeing. You need to spiritually grow a pair. Love that one. I know that's probably taking you back right now. Who says it gets better? Hell, hope, and feathers. This one was good. The half-assed creative process for procrastinators.
Yes.
That's that 83% there.
Yes.
You may be someone's future ghost. Now that's the kind of thing that jumps out at me right there.
Ooh.
Gets me thinking, you may be someone's future ghost. How to become a ghost. The reason you suck at meditation. Love it. How you can stop feeling like a failure. That kind of takes you back to the first one. The fat lady in the garden. Now that's just some visuals right there. Wonder Woman prays for your soul. Manifesting for pessimists. Stupid easy New Year's resolutions. I remember that one. and of course it goes into your podcast titles now too. You have a podcast title called How to F Up Your Ability to Manifest Joy and Abundance. You are a genius, Slade.
Thank you so much for that. That was really fun. Oh God.
Time travel.
It was this is your life. I love those. I think what you will find there is, okay, so there's the me that, like you and anybody else who runs a website, is probably very aware of like search engine keywords. And the fact of the matter is, if I got to title things the way I wanted to artistically, they would be like these one-word enigmatic titles just floating on a black screen, obsession, or something like that. Like they would all sound like perfume ads. But the reality was that when you writing for the web, you actually learn to write differently. And one of the things, that every blogging, how to blog will tell you is that, you've got to put keywords in your titles, and you've got to ask questions that people like identify with and can't help but click to see what the answer is. And, there's all these sort of marketing headline psychology things. And so what I'm kind of doing there is like, okay, fine, I'll do all that, but I'm going to flip you off while I'm doing it. I'm mad about the fact that I have to do it, but I also, I also want to let you know that there's a sense of humor in that. I'm flipping you off, but you're a friend of mine and you get the joke too. And we're flipping it off together. And also to speak to the idea that I'm not a guru. You're right. And I don't want any of this stuff to be mystically elevated and hard to do. I'm lazy and I still want to watch Netflix. So I don't need a yoga practice that, is going to take hours and hours and hours. I need, walking meditations, and I need contemplative dishwashing, and I need to connect to spirit when I'm driving in my car. Like I want it to be part of my life. And so rather than become this weird, fake, perfect person, I decided that, I'm going to bring it to us as much as possible. Like that's the goal, is to bring all that personal development, aspirational stuff, but to try to find, is there somewhere in this that I don't have to be perfect and amazing and I can still have a little bit of that wisdom? Is there somewhere that I can tweak my life? I mean, I think there are, the concept of life hacks and mind hacks kind of came along maybe after I started writing those titles. But I always remember seeing that terminology and thinking, yeah, that's really kind of what I'm doing. I'm just bringing that to the new age gathering. Wherever all the unicorn people are, I'm bringing that same sort of like grounded realism. But also I want to celebrate the fact that, you're a little bit busted and so am I. And I'm not trying to be anything except what I can be. And of course, we want to be better than we are. And so do those titles reflect that? Because to me, that's where I'm coming from when I'm making those jokes. But it's for real, how to stop feeling like a failure is really, the inverse of how to be amazing, 12 steps to be a better person. Like that I want to slap that person. I don't feel like that person's going to be my friend and hang out with me. You know how the litmus test for presidential candidates is whether or not you can go have a beer with them. I want to be the spiritual person that you can go have a beer with. You know what I mean? So I love it that you appreciated that, because you very much are someone I would go have a beer with, and you are someone that I would enjoy speaking about these things with. And so all those dog whistles have called you to me. You know what I mean? Like you heard the call. You're like, yes, I'm one of your tribe of misfit toys. So yeah, here we are.
A Charlie in the box. Sorry, I just had to do that. So, but you're right, because real people are out there Googling questions about their life struggles, and those are going to be the ones that resonate to them. And I really do think some of them probably pop up because they Googled, I just effed up my ability to manifest, and then yours pops up.
Yeah, Ash and I actually talk. One of the things that really connected me to her, and she's been on my podcast, I've interviewed her, and we're friends as well. And one of the things that we really connect over, and the thing that I think she's actually a lot cooler at than me, is she's a little bit more punk rock than I am. Like I'm just like that kid who kind of got a nose ring, like that was as far as I went. She's kind of like, she shows up at school with purple streaks and, multiple piercings and tattoos, and, like she's fully costumed in kind of badassery. So I really respond to that in her, and she and I kind of talk about it behind the scenes. And I always think, the person that I am when I'm talking to Ash, I wish was the person that I am in public, because I feel like that person is cooler. But then I get up in front of people and I realize there's a lot of nice ladies in the audience. And so I don't go too far. I just go just a little ways. And, maybe because I don't want to exclude anyone, but I do want to let you know that I think it's okay if you cuss.
Well, okay, but how do you kind of wear a nose ring?
I think you just get it like in 11th grade, and then you like stop wearing it over the summer, and so no one notices when you come back to school, that kind of thing. Like it's just an experiment. Or you get one of those nose rings that's like not a real nose ring, and then you just put it on after you leave the house. So people at school think you have a nose ring, but your parents have no idea. That kind of thing. Yeah.
I get it.
So I'm not really as cool as I want to be. But I'm a wannabe, Patrick.
I think I'm a wannabe too. I was the good boy. I was the good boy all the time, and the one that didn't get asked to the parties, but at the same time when friends would come over when I was little and say, "Hey, can Patrick come out and play?" I'd be like, no. Then I'd go up in the attic and play by myself all day long.
I used to sit on my toy box so that my cousins wouldn't mess up my dioramas of my arrangements of action figures. Like, yeah, I didn't want anybody. I was fine with playing by myself.
Yeah, don't mess with me.
Mm-hmm.
So this one may be a spoiler alert, and so I'll let you decide if you want to go into this or not, because I also can't imagine it not leading to a 6-part podcast episode here. But one of the coolest things that I've heard you cover was in 2 parts, and that's Stranger Angels. And I really want people to check out these 2 episodes of your podcast. But, you know, if you're willing to throw in a little bit of background on that, we can, or we can just say, hey, check out these 2 episodes. Because, I mean, it is kind of a spoiler alert type of thing.
I'll try to tease it for you a little bit. I will say this. Thank you for mentioning that, and thank you for asking people to go check that out. I think that Stranger Angels represents my favorite thing on that 12 years of archives. As a piece of writing, and then getting to perform it as a kind of audiobook. Again, it represents this intersection of everything that I love to do, you know, which is sort of narrative storytelling, but also talking about paranormal experiences that have happened to me. So Stranger Angels is about an adventure, I guess, that I had when I went to Europe after graduating from college, as one does. And I experienced an interaction with someone who followed me around the continent and well, from the UK to the continent and around a bit. And I really don't think that this person was a real person. I have reason to believe at the time that there was something creepy going on. Like, I almost got the feeling that I was being tailed. Like, some of the imagery on those blog posts, I remember I was looking for images that kind of looked like thriller covers, like a dark shadow running across Amsterdam. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of felt like I was being hunted in some kind of spy thriller. And years later, I encountered another one of these people that I don't think is a real person, who told me that they weren't real people, and who caused me to look back through some of those experiences that I'd had. I call it a stranger angel because there are a lot of stories about people who are saved and rescued by strangers in different situations. Like, you're somewhere and you're stranded, and then out of nowhere, you know, out of the desert, some strange little man pulls up in a truck and has everything there to fix you and send you on your way, kind of thing. And you never see him again. And, you know, there's no sign of him anywhere, you know. Almost like these people are dropped in, like it's a TV show, like you're living in some kind of Truman Show reality, and there are these walk-on scenarios. Or I think about the Hunger Games, you know, how like they could drop in medicine, you know, and a little parachute or something, you know, into this sort of gamified scenario. And so there are lots of people who have stories about encounters with unusual people who show up out of the blue with either a piece of wisdom or a sense of direction or some kind of physical saving, you know, takes place. And so that was my experience with that phenomenon of feeling like, okay, there are these angels who are walking around among us who may not even be human beings at all. And they have information and guidance and, you know, all these different kinds of ways of interacting with us. But so that's just my version, my personal version of one of those stories. So it's called Stranger Angels. And I did do an audio version of it on the podcast.
In 2 parts. And seriously, guys, go and the links are going to be in the show notes. Both of them, the 2-part. I'll link to the podcast version. And
cool. Yeah.
And you did a great job at teasing that.
Okay, good.
Thank you for doing that.
I wasn't prepared to. Yeah. Didn't have that. I didn't have the movie trailer voice going.
In a world.
Exactly.
So you have a lot of content on your blog and in your podcast on spirit guides. And of course you have your course on contacting your spirit guides. And I find it funny that my very first blog post, as someone who's very much not an expert, this was very much just a dummy on the beginning of his journey of a spiritual shift. And I look back at some of those early posts and I've learned so much since then, and I almost want to delete them. They sound really dorky. But my first blog post was on spirit guides. And so that tells me that was something that I was learning and was fascinating to me. And I looked back at some of those and I found a question, and you probably don't even remember this, but it was a 2013 blog post that you had. And I thought this would be a good way to kind of introduce it. You had a reader question, and it was from Christy. Christy says, is it better to find out who your spirit guides are on your own? Or is it equally valid to ask someone about who your spirit guides are? I'm not at the point where I can visualize them in great detail during meditation on my own. So I'm interested in getting a professional intuitive reading to discover more details about them.
This is what's really interesting about that. I wonder if I'll answer it now the same way that I answered it on the blog post. So
we can look back later.
My feelings about these things have evolved over time. I will say this. There's definitely something greatly validating about having an intuitive corroborate something that you've discovered on your own. I will also say that whatever it is that you've discovered about your guides, or however it is that you've named them or learned instinctively to communicate with them and work with them, is to me more important and more valid than something that a stranger is going to tell you, even if they are a psychic. So for instance, if you have a guide that you really love and it's your favorite guide and it's the main one you connect with, don't assume that a psychic might not pick up on another guide, or, might not necessarily perceive that guide as being important or special in some way. Because I think of it this way: that relationship between what you pick up and what a psychic might pick up could be accurate, but also off. And what I mean by that is, imagine that you have a cocktail party or a birthday party, and you invite people that you know, your friends, people that are from your family, maybe some of the people you work with. Your favorite person in that room is not necessarily going to be the person that I'm most drawn to. So, for instance, if I was to blindly go into that room and just feel my way towards whoever is kind of lighting up for me or whoever I resonate with, I may end up in the corner having this amazing conversation with someone who works in accounting down the hall that you've had lunch with 4 or 5 times, but it's not necessarily your best friend that you text on a daily basis. You see what I'm saying? Now, that person may have real insight into a part of who you are. Because this person works with you, she might know a lot about who you are at work and some of those strengths and those personality qualities, while another person that I might choose to speak to would know more about who you were as a child, or something. So there's a similar kind of phenomenon that can happen with guides. And so you need to always remember that your version of the truth is more important to you than anyone else's. This is a deeply spiritual thing. So if someone comes along as a psychic and tells you, no, that's not your main guide. Your main guide is this other person over here who really isn't that interesting to you and seems kind of intimidating and strange. And now you're supposed to go meditate and hang out with this person that you may not necessarily feel a lot of warmth for. And I'm using person, to describe these entities. But you see the metaphor of what I'm kind of saying here. There's so many different interactions and possible connections that you could have with these guides. Now, having said all that, you probably wrote that blog post at a time when, as you say, you were really fascinated with the topic. You were spending a lot of time kind of, investigating that. I also went through a period where I was really interested in who everybody was that was connected with me and how to tell what kind of entity they were and, get as many names for them as possible, understand different areas of my life that maybe they connect with. At the end of the day, I unpacked that, right? Like I took it apart into all its pieces and spread them all out on the table. And I took the puzzle apart, so to speak. And where I am now with all that is I dumped it all back in a box. And I just pull out the whole box. When I'm driving around in my car and I'm speaking to my guides, I speak to them sort of collectively. You know what I mean? Like I don't really worry too much about who does what and whatever. I just sort of speak to them as if they're like a carload of kids that are driving around with me. Now, I do have a guide that even by my own tutorials would not really show up necessarily to someone as a primary spirit guide because she's actually what we would call an angelic entity. But she's the one that I was aware of the earliest in my life. Like maybe around the age of 4. So I have a special place in my heart for her. So if I do kind of get in a place where I want to speak to one of them individually, I always just talk to her. And I think of her as a bit of like a chief of staff. She can delegate to everyone else. So, the way that I would walk someone through it who's a client or whatever might actually be a little bit different than the reality of how I do it. But I also always put that fine print in there that, it's entirely within your own rights to feel however you want to feel about it. There are a lot of people who have opinions about who and what these entities are and, whether or not we are imposing names and identities on them or they're, whether or not they're accurate. I don't really think any of that matters. I think that is your personal kind of aesthetic, your personal style. Some people like a lot of high magic, like a lot of ritual. Other people, like myself, want it to be something that I do in gym shorts when I'm walking, on a trail. I want it to feel like I'm just a crazy person who's talking to myself and I'm getting answers that are insightful. And at the end of the day, what matters is, does that connection produce a sense of comfort, a sense of hope? Does it provide you with potential solutions that you haven't thought of before? And I'm also okay with backing all the way out where we say, okay, this is just all a bunch of imaginary friends dress up. And what it really is a psychological mechanism of connecting with the higher self or with some kind of inner wisdom. And I'm okay if you wanted to like just really talk about it in clinical terms and say, you know what, this is just our attempt to describe something extremely esoteric that we don't really have the language to perceive and we can't compute or model it or whatever. And I will be entirely fine with someone, 100 years from now being able to clinically explain or even biologically evidence what it is that I'm talking about when I talk about these guides. And they may look back at me and I may be the equivalent of an 18th century dentist. It's like terrifyingly vulgar attempt to, master this complex psychological phenomenon. But it gets the job done, right? Were we able to extract the tooth or not? Did the person survive? So I think that I give myself and everyone else a lot of permission to make it whatever that they want to make it, and also take it apart however they want to take it apart.
18th century dentist. Well, I have absolutely loved everything that we've said here and discussed, and I want to be really mindful of your time, and we've got about 10 minutes, and I want you to have a chance to kind of give us some shameless promotion and just kind of close up with any of your thoughts. But I also want to make sure I get, I have a wonderful listener named Jim Budd, and Jim might even be, a follower of your show. I'm not sure, but I wanted to make sure I get one of my listener questions in.
Yeah.
And, we've got about 10 minutes and we can wrap up. But Jim says, I've used a pendulum which confirmed who two of my guides were. I've had several reasons recently to suspect who they were, but in trying multiple guided meditations multiple times to connect with them, I get nothing. Got any suggestions? What might I be doing wrong, or why might this happen?
I love this because I mentor a lot of people who are developing their intuitive abilities. And one of the things that I've done this for hundreds of people now. And one of the things that I've noted that's true for all of us is we tend to get really, really overly concerned with whatever we try that doesn't work, even to the exclusion of the things that work for us. And so I hear all the time these things from people who are like, oh, I can do automatic writing and it produces tons of information for me, and I can write pages and pages of stuff, but I can't see anything. And they get really concerned about their inability to perform some kind of clairvoyant technique or something, right? So the first thing that I want to say is wherever it is that you get results, drill there. Think of it as a metal detector. You're waving that around on the beach, and if it beeps, that's where the treasure is, right? So if you're telling me that you're one of those people who is very adept with a pendulum, I'm terrible with a pendulum. I'm convinced I can move it with my mind and psych myself out, and then I don't trust it, and the whole thing just, I throw it down in frustration. But I know some people who work with pendulum dowsing who do these fascinating, complex, charting with the pendulum, and you can go out there and Google for pendulum charts. There's all kinds of complex stuff that you can get into if you have a basic ability with a pendulum. So I want to encourage anyone who can't do something to say, okay, my skill is over here and not there. And to try as much as possible to ignore what it is that you're not so strong in, and go and develop the thing that you are, because we all have a little bit of these abilities, some more than others. And in most cases, there is going to be one particular clair, like clairsentience or clairvoyance or clairaudience, that you are a little bit more adept at naturally. Just like some people can carry a tune, and then some people can really sing, and some people can sing multiple octaves, and, some people are tone deaf. So the tone deaf person might be an incredible percussionist, So focus on where you're getting results. So for instance, guided meditations might be a format that always frustrates you because either that is not connecting with a visual component for you that's not as turned on, or it could be something about, people telling you stories that's interruptive to your brain. I've heard people tell me that my own guided meditations sometimes take them out of their visualization, because I say something a certain way or whatever. So there's a distraction element there. So I would say, look very realistically at, okay, I try all these different techniques and tools and psychic modalities, and this one, something happened really cool with that. Okay, if that's the one that works for you, do more of that. Figure out, how can I take pendulum dowsing to another level? That thing over here that I can't do, that might come back in later. Or it might never come in, but who cares, because you're an amazing pendulum dowser.
Awesome answer. Okay, help me pack up the parlor here. Give us what's going on with Slade and where people can find you and any final thoughts. And you totally rock. I'm so glad we did this.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. I've wanted to be on your show for a long time. I'm a big fan as well. For all of my podcast episodes and show notes, please visit shiftyourspirits.com. If you'd like to get an intuitive reading with me or download that free ebook, Contacting Your Spirit Guides, you can go to sladeroberson.com. And if you're interested in my professional intuitive training program, you can start the course for free by downloading the attunement at automaticintuition.com.
Thank you to the following super paranerds who support the show at patreon.com/Big Seance. Jenny Becker, Bianca Roth, Kim Robb, Jim Budd, David Rubenstein, Josiel Lorenzo, Amy Park Gedicke, and Susan Davey. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/parlorguests, are Clairvoyant Marion Hover, Miranda Stroop, Bruce Williams, Christopher Kohler, Lena and John of Carbon Lilies, Denise Sia, Anna Frias, Norman and Linda Keller, and Karen Prine. And I have some Apple Podcasts /iTunes reviews to share this week. Linda, number 555, says, "Great listen. This being a recent find, I've only listened to a handful of episodes. However, I give this a 5-star rating and subscribed so I don't miss an episode. Great content and certainly worth a listen." Miss Boo says, "A gem amongst paranormal podcasts. Patrick's show is without a doubt one of the most well-done, interesting, and passionate paranormal shows I listen to. I've said this over and over again because it's the truth. What I love most about his show is that his episodes are memorable, and they are memorable because his content is presented mindfully and with enthusiasm. If you are a genuine paranerd, this show will not disappoint. Cheers, Patrick." Thank you, Miss Boo. That's an awesome one. Pelvis Thrasher, that makes me laugh, says, "I love this podcast. Found this podcast yesterday, and I just love it. So many great guests and spooky stories. Also very informative. Great podcast. Highly recommend if you're into the woo-woo stuff." Thank you for your reviews. I so appreciate it. It's been a while since I've had some reviews to read. Well, before I go, can I give you some Paranerd homework this week? Can you choose one or two peeps who might enjoy being subscribed to the show and help them to do that on their favorite podcast platform? There's the Apple Podcast app, the new Google Podcast app, there's Spotify, and many others. I'd really like to grow our Big Seance community, and if you have any great ideas about how to do that, then I hope to hear from you. Patrick at bigseance.com. You rock. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. You can find and subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and just about anywhere podcasts are found. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time. Well, our Paranerd hashtag for today is Shift Your Spirits. So tag myself at Big Seance, tag Slade at Slade Roberson, and use the hashtag Shift Your Spirits. All one word. Here's a funny outtake. During meditation on my own, so I'm interested in getting a professional intuitive reading to discover more details about them.
What's the question? Is that the question?
Oh, I almost peed. That's funny.